about the art of the public space. Let's begin at one of the signal moments of the 21st century so far, Tahrir Square in Cairo, on the night the Mubarak dictatorship fell, almost exactly 1 year ago today. And let's begin as well with a hypothesis that public space is the heart of the city, of any city. The metaphor is almost literal. Public spaces pump life into the rest of the city. They connect together all those spread out, disjointed parts, and they give them food. Public spaces are the city's blank canvases, the only places that can be anything to anyone. They are the essential first sites of civic action, the seedbeds of democracy. We understand this as Canadians. There are just 4 fundamental freedoms listed off the top in our Charter of Rights, and one of them is freedom of peaceful assembly. That is not the freedom to assemble in your living room to watch television. It is to exercise your basic rights, is to begin with a place to assemble peacefully. And to do that, you need a public space. And the people who overthrew Egypt's dictatorship certainly understood this. There's a picture of Tahrir Square in Cairo on the night that a single public space toppled a dictator without firing a shot. And this is the power, one of them anyway, of public space in a city. This was maybe Tahrir's finest moment in this image. It is certainly one of its most quietly powerful moments. After the party, after the improbable revolution and the reclamation of a great public space, Tahrir belonged once again, finally, to the people and not to the dictatorship. Tahrir was a liberated space, and now it was a cherished space. And so each morning, without pay and without orders from on high, the people of Cairo cleaned their square. And they cleaned many other of their liberated streets in the city just the same way. And incidentally, the people of Vancouver did the exact same thing after the Stanley Cup riots. Because, of course, it's not just the grand central square, but every street in a city that belongs to its people. This is something that's very easy to forget, actually, that streets are public spaces. Before they are commuter arteries or shopping destinations or home addresses, streets are public spaces. We've definitely forgotten this in Canada, at least in some places. Maybe it's that we've had our democratic freedoms a bit too long. We've come to neglect some of them, take them for granted. We don't vote as often or as eagerly maybe as we should, and we forget that streets are public spaces. We made a critical mistake over the last half century in Canada, sort of an accidental mistake. We assumed the needs of people and the needs of their cars were one and the same, and of course they're not. And so this is a space built only by and for cars, for private vehicles. It's a conquered public space, and it too needs to be liberated. This is what a fully liberated street looks like. This is a public square along Copenhagen's main downtown avenue on a cool, sunny May afternoon. In Copenhagen in 1962, the square you're looking at was a parking lot, literally a parking lot, a place to park while you shopped on the streets all around, which were also all choked with cars, by the way. There were so many cars, in fact, in downtown Copenhagen that the city considered banning bicycles, beloved by many, many people in Denmark, because they were getting in the way. Does that sound familiar? In 1962, against almost everyone's will, the city of Copenhagen closed this street completely to car traffic for the first and last time. The city's leaders understood, almost unconsciously, that public space was worth more if it had fewer cars on it and more people using it. And half a century later, in part because of this, Copenhagen routinely tops lists of the world's most livable cities. So yes, this is a liberated street in Copenhagen, but it could truly be anywhere. The great Danish urban philosopher Jan Gehl likes to say, cultures and climates differ all over the world, but people are the same. They will gather in public if you give them a good place to do it. They will gather in public if you give them a good place to do it. Give the streets back to the people really anywhere, create great public space anywhere, and people will use it. And those cities, the ones that create that great public space, are the cities that are going to prosper in this century. And this is the value of the art of the public space. This is downtown Melbourne, Australia in 2008. The other side of the world, 46 years after Copenhagen's liberation began. And in 1978, downtown Copenhagen was described by the city's leading architecture critic as an empty, useless city center. An empty, useless city center. They call them donut cities. No one stays after dark. But then Melbourne decided it wanted to be a lot more like Copenhagen. Deliberately, that it wanted to be like Copenhagen. It decided to give its public space back to the people. It closed one of its streets to cars, yes, that was part of it, but more than that, it really changed the way it thought about its public space across the board. Melbourne City Hall said if you had a laneway like this next to your high-rise, you had to let people use it again. You had to let them open little shops and cafes. You had to give this public space back to the people who need it. And so now, a generation later, the laneways are truly the heart of Melbourne. They're like a grand Italian piazza that has been stretched out into a long rope and just strung around the city like garland. Go to Melbourne, and I guarantee you your evening will begin at a cafe in a laneway. New York City, 2009. This is Times Square, the epicenter of America's ultimate metropolis. And it's another city that was liberated the Copenhagen way. In New York, in fact, they got so excited about Copenhagen's approach to liberation that they actually sent their traffic engineers to Denmark, and they got down on their knees and measured sidewalks and bike lanes and all the rest of it so that they could copy them just right. And in May 2009, for the first time since the days of Henry Ford's Model T, Broadway closed to car traffic between 42nd and 47th Streets. The day before the closure, 89% of the surface area in Times Square was for cars alone. 250,000 people were walking through the space every day, and they were trapped in just 1/10 of the total public space. And now, for the first time in a century, the square belongs to people again. The critics scoffed, of course, and the merchants and the taxi drivers all got very worried about their business. But here it is liberated, and truly it's never been better. Calgary, October 2010. This is, in fact, the alley right outside that wall. And this is the only day in the fall of 2010 that the city of Calgary gave the people of Calgary permission to use this public space for something other than motor vehicles and garbage. It was First Thursday, and Theatre Junction, much to their credit, got special dispensation to turn the alley over there into a dance bar for just one night. So look how bad we want this here. We got one night of freedom, and we crammed in by the hundreds and threw a party. So this, folks, is how we create public space right here, right now. And the reason we do it is because public space is the heart of the city. Without it, the city dies. You have enough of it, the city prospers and grows and thrives. And that, right there, is the art of the public space. Thanks.